Welcome to this episode of Can Trustworthy AI Help De Risk Adoption of AI? We are going to be talking about what makes effective AI governance. In this episode, I am talking with Steven Tiell. He is a non resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Geotech Center. Stephen founded and led Accenture's global data ethics and responsible innovation practice. He is a strategy executive with wide technology expertise and particular depth in data ethics and AI governance. He also provided guidance to the Monetary Authority of Singapore on their fairness, ethics, accountability, and transparency policy. Welcome, Stephen. Honor to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, we're going to talk about how trustworthy AI can be instrumental in helping organizations, public or private in this case, gain a competitive edge and promote better business outcomes, including accelerated innovation with AI through finally laser honed, I would say, effective AI governance because it's going to require a lot of um, more thought and precision as opposed to what we have seen for regular system just because of the complexity of AI. Like let's actually start off with if you want to talk about give us more details on your guidance for the Monetary Authority of Singapore.
Sure. So this particular project is really the only one I did at Accenture that I can talk about. It's in the public domain. Um, and it really started with this notion that the Monetary Authority of Singapore really noticed and wanted to lead with how AI is affecting banking customers. And for them, it's really banking, insurance, and capital markets, so financial services, if you will. And realizing that financial services companies were using AI at the time. This work was delivered in February of last year. It is with their standards group, and with a little bit of luck, we'll see it move into audit criteria in the next year or two. But this really started with this notion that banks are using
Mhm.
AI today, and they might be using it to target individuals for new services that they believe can help move their lives in a trajectory that they want. But they also realize that it can be used to push financial products to folks who may or may not be receptive, or maybe that won't help them. And so they want to be sure that financial services companies are using AI responsibly, are targeting individuals responsibly, and that there's some recourse and regulator that's looking over what they're doing to ensure that kind of compliance. And in the meantime, if this doesn't make it to audit, then it's merely guidance that organizations can use who are looking to go above and beyond what is required and have a more best practices in its use.
That's really interesting because I just led a discussion on, in fact, a couple of days ago, at AI Summit on responsible AI for financial and critical infrastructure, and especially when it comes to generative AI, for example, and the gathering of data that is typically not even collected or produced on banking websites, for example. How can they leverage that data for offering products like you mentioned? So this would be very interesting, and thank you for doing that. I do hope it becomes a part of the intended objective as it went in, as what you had provided for. So I think it's a good time to maybe set the tone on what is responsible AI, or how do you look at what is trustworthy AI?
Yeah, well, I think on the trustworthy AI topic, I think it's first important to define trust. And this is my own definition that I came to over many years of working on building infrastructures of trust, if you will. And it's really the belief that the other party's goals are aligned with yours, there is competence to achieve those goals, and one or both parties will work toward those goals. And when trust is
Mhm.
present, we see really great things happen. And we see things move at pace. We see an adoption of new products. You know, the example I love to use is look at Apple customers. You know, they have great trust in the brand. And when they release any new product, there's lines around the block to go and purchase it and spend your hard-earned money on that new shiny thing. They have a high degree of trust with customers, and that lends itself to more widespread adoption and more adoption of new things. Now, a lot of folks want that product-led growth, but they don't see that it comes through trust. And so I think it's really important to note that governments are looking at this as well. Leading companies are looking at trust, and even a lot of governments and companies are using technologies such as blockchain to build infrastructures of trust.
Thank you. I love that perspective, of what it means to an organization to derive that trust and to derive and drive. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the role of trust in the digital world, right? Where we are collecting a lot of data, where we are producing a lot of data, and one of the things that is going to be playing a very big role in what data is produced and how it's processed, etc., is the role of regulations. So we are seeing a lot of activity around whether it's the EU AI Act, the executive order, which is not a regulation yet, but it's driving towards setting some stakes in the ground, for example. So, how do you see that relating to trustworthy AI? What is the role, in other words, of regulations at this point in time in effective AI governance?
Yeah, I think it's wow. There's so many places where it's showing up, right? It's showing up. You know, certainly we see that notion of trust coming through in the EU AI Act. Now, the recent kind of closure that we've seen there hasn't yielded the text just yet of what that those agreed upon terms are, but you know, we expect to see that hopefully in the next few weeks here. But I think that what we see is this need for the public to be able to hold those who create AI systems
Hmm.
accountable. One of the key aspects of trust is being able to have recourse. I have a voice. I'm at the table, or I can pull a chair up to the table and sit there. Right? I have this ability to have recourse, and that recourse will receive proper and appropriate redress. And so it's not just that, oh, I can send an email and complain and it goes to the bit bucket on the other side. It's that, oh, I can send an email. If it doesn't receive a response by a certain period of time, then there are repercussions. Then there are, commitments, and perhaps eventually a regulator that will do something about it. So I think, you know, if we look at the EU AI Act, we see elements of trust throughout. I think as we look at coming regulation in the US, we see good intentions
Mm.
for trust. Um, but I think, you know, it's also important to note that, you know, the US still needs to figure out comprehensive legislation for data privacy and data protection. You know, so I think we have a long way to go. You know, whereas the EU AI Act, while it's still several years off into implementation, it can really like stand on the shoulders of the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, which you know are in effect and you know already apply to elements of AI technologies. And so, you know, I think we're already seeing that trust will play a larger role going forward than what it has. And in the past, we've seen more technical things, but I think that we'll see the spirit of trust permeating more legislation around the globe.
Wow, thank you. That's certainly a great answer. What so when you were talking about a quick question that but that raises a question for me, which is when you were talking about accountability, right? Like to spend a little bit more time on that. One of the things that regulations are geared towards is what needs to be done by whom, and there is a element of accountability, right? Holding somebody accountable, as you mentioned, but going, drilling into that a little bit more. When we're talking about accountability, we're talking about accountability to whom and by whom. The the regulations that we are seeing coming or brewing or developing in whether it's EU AI Act or the executive order, what is driving, where do you see that accountability, Stephen? Is that can you
Well,
elaborate on
I'll
that, please?
say, yeah, a year ago I got really excited because the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy put out a blueprint for a Bill of Rights for
Mm-hmm.
regulating AI. And in there, more than half of it was about a rights based framework where this AI Bill of Rights would bestow rights on individuals to be able to. Um, I'm sorry, I think I may have just lost
Yes.
you. Are you still there? Oh, great. Um, sorry about that. So that was an exciting time when you saw a lot of that blueprint focused on rights. And then this year, when the executive order came out, the rights based language was largely missing or not there. And so I think ultimately the US has an opportunity to really lead on the global stage. Certainly we've made an impression on the world with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And I think that the US has an opportunity to really contribute globally by bestowing rights onto individuals for how organizations might deliver AI, or rights that they would have, consuming AI systems from others. Right now, what we see is really a risk based and principles
Mhm.
based approach to regulation, where it says, one, we're really worried about, and we see this abundantly clear in the EU AI Act, where their focus on high risk uses is very
Right.
clear. They outright ban certain uses, and so some of those look like biometric categorization systems, especially ones that would use any kind of special characteristic. And so in Europe, it's important to know that they have protected classes, just like in the US. Other parts of the world do not enjoy those protections. They also ban untargeted scraping of facial images. So you must have a reason why you need it, and you must get it from a reliable source that is not just kind of broad-based scraping of images you can find online that are associated with the name. They ban social scoring systems like we've
Right.
seen in China, and systems that might manipulate human behavior to circumvent free will. so so I don't, and that one in particular, um, I think is really, some folks look at that and say, oh, this is about social networks, but I think really the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act have more to do with social than what the AI Act does. But just the fact that they're calling out specific uses that are
Mhm.
too high risk. Now, I know that some of the lobbying from other countries in the EU the last few weeks was really about, hey, how should we carve out some exemptions here? France, Germany, and Italy were really worried about
Right.
innovation and domestic startups. And so the what I understand is the agreement does include some innovation measures, such as regulatory sandboxes, to be able to allow innovation to happen, but in a more protected environment that would allow these high risk systems to at least be road tested and be able to have an engagement with the regulator and being able to develop those so that there is access to innovation, even though that might intersect with some of these uses that are more high
So,
risk.
in other words, if it is a high risk application, such as facial recognition, for example, that is recognized, being called out for what the implications are, that is the high risk category. But it will have higher requirements of trustworthiness around it, at the highest level, right? But
So my understanding is that the carve outs are really around law enforcement. And so, they recognize that technology can aid law enforcement, and there is not a desire to really hinder the ability of law enforcement and allow criminals to outpace on the technology side. And so, that's really where that
mm,
negotiation is happening. And I think we'll see some language in the next few weeks um, that might emphasize the role that this technology plays in law enforcement. And so, having strong oversight and governance of anyone who would use high risk technologies is certainly front and center in the Europeans' mind.
that's great. Like to highlight that the oversight and governance for high risk areas is expected to be at a heightened or a more heightened level. I know that it was a surprise when what they're talking about, even in the EOAI Act, about surveillance. That was, it was thought that it was going to be um, completely off the charge, or not off the acceptable list, but it's not. So we'll see how that plays out. So now the important thing I think for understanding is also the difference between the EU AI Act, the focus that they have taken, that risk-based approach, whereas the one that is being taken in the US is more around centering on developing and trustworthiness and safety and security around the system as they are being developed, as opposed to that risk-based approach, right? To make sure that you're incorporating right hygiene and right best practices as you're rolling out these systems, which is, as we know, there's a lot of complexity to AI systems, so that such that it's not um, always obvious. Even when you take a snapshot in time, it's not enough, and it's not obvious as to what all the different risk elements might be. Do you have any thoughts on that, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, it's really where governments are looking at that intersection of risk and society is really around how does technology impact people's lives, and how can we prevent negative impacts from happening at scale. So as we look at those both positive and negative impacts, the way that governments are thinking about this is really saying, look, if bad things happen at scale and we don't know it for some period of time later, does that matter for a movie recommendation, or does that matter for my access to
Hmm.
benefits? Well, I think we can all agree that in one case it matters and another case it really doesn't. If I get a bad movie recommendation, maybe I spoiled an hour or two of my life that I won't get back. But if I get a bad loan recommendation, or I get banned from getting benefits that my family needs, then I have a different set of circumstances that really change the trajectory of my life. And that's really what governments are trying to avoid. So I think, in one way, the US approach of regulating through, let's call it a dozen different agencies, is anti fragile. It is a good long term approach that allows a variety of stakeholders, a variety of concerns to have voice, and it gives a variety of pathways of enforcement. However, it also can have a tendency to water things down, that one agency may not be as aggressive on enforcement as another, that one agency may not be as willing to have stringent rules as another. And so ultimately, where I would like to see things go is really this hybrid approach where we're both saying, okay, look, here's really high risk areas where AI might be used. Let's look at regulating those. Let's look at how we have additional governance and oversight and accountability there. And then we have another range of things where it would make sense to bestow rights on individuals. And we allow individuals to have rights because then everybody must honor those rights. Companies must have things in place. For instance, if I was to have a right to see information about myself, we've already seen this right bestowed to individuals in certain
Mhm.
states in the U.S., but we really haven't seen that be widespread. So again, this comes back to privacy and data protection, and the U.S. is still sorely in need of rules around that. But again, if we bestow rights, that's a more distributed way of saying you must provide this level of care across the board for anything that you do. And I think the two approaches working together are really the strongest way that we can guarantee safety and for users and beneficiaries of AI.
That's pretty interesting. And I'm assuming when you're referring to the states which are giving users rights to their data, is Illinois the
So Illinois has a specific carve out for that, as does California and the CCPA. So it's and I think there might be a couple other ones that are. It's really
I
hard to
know.
keep track what every state in the U.S. is doing. This patchwork approach really doesn't work. It's difficult for me as a thought leader, and it's difficult for companies that are trying to move in that direction and trying to
Yeah.
be compliant. I've worked with many clients who, their goal was beyond compliance. What is the most strict that we could foreseeably see in the next few years? And let's go beyond that because we don't want our business to be encumbered by regulation that we're not compliant with. We actually want to be empowered and enabled by the oversight and governance that we've established so that no matter what we see in front of us, it doesn't add friction to our growth.
I think that's a very wise approach to take, but not that will be that common. And if you know of these companies, please do send them my way too, because I would love to have them as a client. It is an uphill battle sometimes to even. So, for example, I was in a conversation not too long ago where it was brought up that we don't need to do anything, right? We are already, over the years, we have amassed risk management expertise that is good enough, right? We don't need to do anything specifically for AI that is, you know, different from what we are already doing. And I don't think that it's that common knowledge, widespread a common knowledge that these are really high impact systems which are going to require a different approach. It's not, there is no silver bullet, there never was, that part hasn't changed, but that's about that's about the only generality.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can learn from those who have come before us and those in other industries, right? So, as you probably well know, cybersecurity has been down
Yes.
this road before. It wasn't until fines for non-compliance got sufficiently high, the government got sufficiently involved, where boards actually took note and said, "Oh, now it's actually less expensive for us to comply than for us to just not comply and keep having these issues, right? And so we've seen that group kind of go forward. We've also seen, I loved working with financial services companies because, as you mentioned, they already have a very a very well practiced risk um, um,
Right.
risk
Right.
processes at banks. And so my work with them on governance just plugged into existing governance structures. There was nobody who was thinking like, oh, I have to do all this extra work now. It was like, oh, great, we'll just add this to this meeting that's already happening, and we'll be able to implement this governance. The people that need to be involved are similar. The roles that need to be involved are similar. The way we disseminate this information is similar. The way that we escalate things is similar. So working with financial services companies, this is what they already do already. They're the most heavily regulated, and rightfully so, because that's where everyone keeps
Right.
their money. And so I think there's a lot that we can all learn from financial services companies as
Yes,
well.
I think critical infrastructure, does play a big part in what they already have in place, how they adapt to the new changes, right? Even for financial services, for example, who are doing model risk management, what are the changes that they need to do? But to your point, yes, they already have all the building blocks are already there. It's a question of adding on or refining that, so it is a easier proposition. Now, in conclusion, actually, I like to kind of throw maybe a monkey wrench into the conversation and talk to you and ask your opinion on, yes, the regulated industries are marching towards, um, not simplifying, but making their regulatory environment and their compliance environment, their operational risk environment more robust to be reactive and responsive to the risk that AI brings. Do you feel the non regulated industries have to do one fourth of that, one half of that? I mean, how much do they need to match up?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it really comes down to, and we're seeing this in regulation as well. It's really, what is your revenue? In Europe, it comes down to size of organization. It comes down to size of and they have a stipulation of which foundational models need to be included, and it's something. It's a quantifiable measure of, if you use this many petaflops, during training, then your model falls under the regulation. So really, they're going after the largest of the large models. So I think that as we move toward this space of increased regulation for artificial intelligence, every company is going to be affected that uses AI. Smaller companies will be affected less unless you're working in these highly regulated areas. Larger companies will be affected more. And that's both a function of their geographic diversification, as well a function of how many
Mm.
individuals they touch, and really how much impact that they are able to have in the marketplace. And so I think that everybody will be affected, but we'll start seeing, just like with GDPR, years after it was passed and in force, or under enforcement, many companies still
Hmm.
did not comply. And most of those that did not comply were small and medium sized businesses. Some large businesses still didn't, but by and large, they were all moving in that direction. And I think we're going to see the same thing here. It'll be normal course of action, probably 3 to 5 years after
Hmm.
enforcement begins, because larger companies use smaller companies as
Right.
suppliers. We'll start seeing procurement systems that change. All of this has kind of cascading roll-on effects. So I'm really excited to see the European Union, moving forward at pace. I hope the U.S. is able to do the
Okay.
same.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to add as a conclusion, or I think that's a great conclusion.
Just thanks for
Thank
having me,
you.
Pamela.
Okay. care.
Cheers.